Book 00. Fang the Cosmic Redragon Overlord. As far as time was born.
RenderForest.com.
The universe and brought life to it. Not too long after that, there was a creature whom traveled across the known universe. Bring his life to it. He brought life to the dragons. After his job was finished, he returned to his galactic cave and began to hibernate for 1,500 years. Humans and dragons began to get along just fine until one day. That one day was a tragic one indeed. A dragon was running out of food to feed her young, so she stole a sheep from a human's farm. The next day the farmer noticed and went to slay the dragon. This cracked the sealed contract between the humans and dragons. The creator of the dragons had awoken 100 years too early due to this, causing it to go corrupt. The cosmic dragon took a half-human half-dragon form and calls herself Fang. She headed towards the human world to destroy the humans for breaking the contract and for waking her. A war was raging between the humans and the dragons due to the corruption of Fang. And the dragons were winning. "I shouldn't have been awoken so early, mortals," a voice said from above the clouds. The dragons stopped fighting and stood still, bowing their heads. Fang lands onto the ground between the humans and dragons. Fang walked around the humans, waiting for one wrong move. She was finally able to see a human trembling in fear with his sword pointing at Fang. She laughed, said, "You think you can kill me?" She laughs. She turned him into ashes by looking at him with her left eye. The rest of the humans began to run away, but Fang ordered the dragons to kill them. They say, "Yes, my lord," and they begin killing and eating the humans. Fang chuckled and flew back to the cave to try to get her 100 years of hibernation. 100 years have passed by and Fang has awoken from her 12,000-year hibernation. She heads throughout the known universe, and when she reached Earth, Fang wasn't pleased at all. "I hibernate for 100 years and what do I see? My children are gone and these filthy humans don't believe in them. Time to bring their belief back." Fang rushed into the Milky Way's solar system and stopped on top of the sun to gain expansive power and energy. Then Fang heads into Earth at max speed and lands in a rainforest. This is. She starts but was interrupted by a gunshot. Fang gets furious and walks towards the location of the gunshot. But she was knocked out from behind. After waking up, she noticed that she was chained all around. Then something in her mind snapped. Fangs laughs creepily and breaks the chains with ease, and she walks up to the guard and puts her hand on his shoulder and said, "My children were forced to leave this world because of you humans, and your actions. So I hereby deem you guilty." She then ripped him in half and began to eat everything but the skeleton. "Ha! I killed someone. Finally." She chuckled before walking to where she heard that gunshot once again. As Fang reached the area, she saw a family of white tigers wounded on the ground. "You poor things, let me help you." Fang took out the bullets and placed her hands on their wounds. A magical power began to heal the tigers. Fang's sixth sense began to act up. So she caught a bullet that was heading towards her and roars at the human who shot it. He fell on his back and screamed. "My ears." Fang continued to heal the tigers. As she finished healing them, she hugged the tigers and stood up. As Fang began walking out of the area, the tigers followed her. She noticed and said, "So, you want to come with me?" She gave it some thought as she crouched down next to the shooter. "Feast on him and I'll allow it. But you must find me when you finish." Fang stood up and climbs a tree to the top and looks around the rainforest. She fell asleep and woke up at midnight. Fang hears a howl of a wolf pack and more gunshots. She sighs and opened her wings, then began flying to the other shooter and the wolf pack. Fang lands in a nearby tree and saw a hunter aiming his rifle at a pack of wolves. So Fang opened her wings and flew to the wolf pack. As she lands near them, she heard the gunshot and said, "Shit." She uses time travel to teleport herself into the bullet's path and was shot. She flinched and slowly walks towards the hunters. As they shot her, more and more blood covered her body until Fang grabbed their guns and shot them with their own weapons. As she turns to check on the wolves, another hunter shot her back with a shotgun, causing her to fall over. The hunter was a kid, who looked about 18 maybe 19 years old. He walked over to Fang, whom of which was beginning to get back up, and shot her with the rest of his shotgun shells, mutilating her body. As he walked away, he stops and turned around. He was attacked by the wolf pack. After he died, the wolves split up to scavenge herbs and water for Fang, whom was bleeding out severely. After regrouping with the herbs and items, the pack howled a song. The song brought the spirit of the forest to them. "Why have you summoned me, wolves?" the spirit asks. The wolves whine next to Fang's body, signaling that they want him to revive her. "Very well," he answered. Then all of the spirits in the forest gathered around Fang's body and lifted her up, removing the bullets and shotgun pellets from her body. They began to heal her and bring her back to life. Fang fell onto the ground and the pack of wolves lay around her, protectively. The forest's guardian spirit vanished and so did the other spirits. After 3 hours of resting, Fang woke up and saw the wolves. "You're okay? Good. Thanks for reviving me," she says. As she stood up and began walking, the pack followed her. She noticed and smiles as she exits the forest with the wolves and tigers. They were now in a beautiful meadow. Fang was tired and walks up to a cherry blossom tree and sat against it. The animals that followed her surrounded her, sleeping next to her. Ironically though, bunnies, birds, and animals of all sorts joined the surrounding animals. Fang smiled and fell asleep. Hours later, Fang woke up and saw castle. "Well now, it would seem that I found my first target area," Fang chuckled. But before she and her new animal friends got near the castle gate, they heard battles going on just inside, so they walked to the back castle wall. They saw a massive hole in the wall, and a massive army invading. They also had ogres, giants, cyclops, minotaurs, and surprisingly, dragons. She pulls out a couple pieces of grass and whistles a mystic song. The army and monsters stopped fighting. They saw that Fang was walking towards them with armor covering her true form. "Dragon!" one of the soldiers yelled. However, that wasn't all that was gaining armor and power. The animals that followed Fang began to have the same effect. Fang roars as her wings had the universe in them. "You humans stopped believing in my children and now you will pay." Fang growls, "My name is Fang. I'm the cosmic dragon creator. Each and every dragon is my child. You forced them out in pain and suffering. You even killed some of them. Now I return the favor." Fang snarls. The now giant animals began to attack the humans while a phoenix flies onto Fang's shoulder, combining their attacks causing serious damage to the armies, eventually forcing them to retreat. But Fang wasn't going to let them get away. She flaps her wings, causing her to fly up into the clouds. The animals returned to the meadow to wait for Fang to return. Fang finally got ahead of the fleeing humans and surrounded them, saying, "You can't hide from me, not as long as there are stars in the universe." The phoenix flies to the meadow and Fang began to kill the last of the army. After she was done killing that army, Fang flew towards the castle, but guards were waiting for her with war ballistas and spearmen. So Fang stopped just out of their range and thinks for a plan. That's when she decides to use a forbidden dragon breath, the vaporizing black comet. She chants the spell and threw it at the castle. Instantly the castle was gone. Fang then returned to her other form and walked back to the meadow to sleep. As she sleeps she says, "I've avenged my children and made some amazing friends in the process, but my journey isn't over. Not yet." Book 01 After Story of the Lone Survivor. Where should I begin? I know. Let's start after my family was buried. Chuckles again. Chapter 0. Draco has just left his family's graves after putting some black roses on the graves. He heard a familiar voice in his mind. "Oh my, they're dead. What a shame." "Well then. You do need me, so release me." Draco. Draco shook his head and said no. "You are not to be released, King of Cosmic Dragons." Draco fell to his knees, holding his hand over his left eye. It was completely black now. Draco was groaning in pain as he tried to not give in. His wings opened and he flew towards what the humans called Slender Woods. He stopped at the entrance and walks in. Chapter 1. As Draco walked into the woods he stopped groaning and lowered his hand. He finds a white, dragon-shaped mask and says, "A mask?" As he put it on, Draco screams as his body changed and the mask sinks into his body, causing him to become the Prince of the Cosmos, Nova. He roared and slowly walks out of the woods. He eventually found a teenage girl texting at a nearby skate station. Well, MHMM. Nova's newest host walked into the darkness and sneaks up to the girl. Striking from above he said, "Go back to sleep, and the apocalypse awaits you," before tearing her limb from limb, eating the organs. Suddenly, as he stood up he saw a red-headed boy with a trench coat and fingerless gloves walk up the hill. Draco pulled off the mask as he approached him. "Go back to the darkness," before knocking him out and laying his body next to the victims, and he flew off. Chapter 2. The next day. Draco had just woke up in his house and brushed his teeth. As he did so he had turned on his radio and heard there was a brutal murder at a nearby skate station. Authorities say that the teenage girl, 17 years old, was ripped apart last night. Her name was Amanda Green. Stay tuned for more on this case. Static fills the room. The mask that Draco found is now floating in the air, taking form of Nova, and says this is only the beginning. There will be more murder. Draco looks at him and said, "For what reason?" Nova's spirit smirked and turned on the TV. "Look and see for yourself." Draco looks at the TV and his eyes widened. He saw Jeff. He was leaving notes in the plaza board and police stations, causing those who once called him a hero to turn against him. Draco sheds a tear and said, "What should I do then?" Nova's spirit walked towards Draco and hugs him, saying it'll be tough, but the only option now is to release the Dragon's King's powers, and combine them with my mask. He puts the mask on the side of Draco's head and vanished. Draco stood up and released the power that was sealed inside of him and puts the mask on, causing him to evolve into an advanced form, Hypernova, the Dragon Overlord. Chapter 3. Draco. No. Hypernova was sharpening his blades and claws when he heard a knock on his door. So walks up to it and opened it. "Jess, what are you doing here?" he asked upon seeing her. Suddenly she stabbed his stomach and chuckles, "You monster, I'll kill you." She stabbed the knife even deeper into his stomach. "I'm sorry, Jess, he says as he pulled out a sword and pierced her heart. She died and melted away. He closed his door and walked back to his bathroom to patch up his wound. Gah. Achoo. Got it. He screams as he pulled a knife out. After he finished tending to his wound, Draco puts on the trench coat and gloves he stole that night and puts his weaponry in it, as well as putting his special knives into his belt sheaths. Let's go, he says as his body emits a starry rainbow aura and leaves his house. As he walked down the sidewalk, Draco saw someone. It looked like a girl, so he tells her to walk closer. She did and collapsed into his chest. Jane? Shit. He shouted as he brought her to his house and room. He began to stitch up her wounds and giving her water and medicine. Chapter 4. After a full night's sleep, Jane wakes up next to Draco. Feeling her stomach and back for the wounds, but they were gone. Morning, sleepyhead. I stayed up all night tending your wounds and taking good care of you, Jane, Draco said from behind her. He could tell that she was blushing from behind her mask. Thank you, Draco, Jane said shyly. Jane then asks Draco, have you ever wanted to see my true face? Draco says yes. Yes, I have. Jane slowly pulled off her mask and she had white leathery skin like Draco's, red eyes. Draco says, you're very pretty, Jane. She blushed and said, will you show me what your human form looks like? Draco gave it some thought and closed his eyes. His current form began to deteriorate and his claws and wings shrunk into his hand. He sighed and said, well, Jane, this is my human form. Jane suddenly kissed Draco. Jane. What are you? He said before kissing her back. She pulls him onto the couch and said thank you. Draco pulls away too and said anytime. Chapter 5. The next day. Draco woke up, brushes his teeth and makes a sandwich. She left earlier, you know, Hypernova says in his mind. Draco sighed and took a bite of his sandwich. After Draco finished his sandwich, he walks outside into the woods on a trail. As he walked, he couldn't help but have the feeling that he wasn't alone. So he shrugs it off and continued walking until he reached a beautiful lake. Finally, I'm here, he said as he took off his socks and boots, dipping his feet in the water. As he began to relax, two hands covered Draco's eyes and the words "Guess who?" were said. He smiles and replied, "Clockwork." A faint giggle was heard and she said, "That's right." Draco takes a breath and says, "What are you doing here?" As he turned his head, he blushed. "I'm going for a brief swim here," she answered while wearing her swimsuit. Sky quickly turned his head away. Clocky noticed and decides to tease him. "Oh, Draco. Look what I found." Draco was hesitant but looks anyway. He blushed even more and flinches. "Geez, Clocky. Don't tease me like that," Draco says while being even more embarrassed. She laughed as she walks into the lake. Chapter 6. Hours later, Draco was sleeping in front of the lake and felt a slightly heavy feeling on top of him, so opens his eyes slowly. "Well, you're awake now? Good," Clocky says. Draco squirms and twists but couldn't her off and said, "Shit," quietly. She giggled and said, "If you want me off, you've got to find a way to do it yourself." Draco rolls his eyes and stabbed her shoulder with his claws. "There. All done," he adds as he bolted towards the exit of the tree. But he was stopped by a large crowd of people with various weapons in hand. He sighed and cut his way through them, saying, "Go back to sleep," until he got to the city. He sheds a tear and sat on his old bunk bed. Chapter 7. Draco wakes up the next morning and began to make some scrambled eggs when he heard the doorbell ring. So he turns off the stove and opens the door. "Clocky," he says. Suddenly she stabbed him back and said, "Now we are even."